ICQ Podcast episode 452, ARRL Election Committee Adventures. Well, hello friends and fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to episode 452 of your ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported this episode by our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Dan KB6NU Uniform, Caryn KD2GUT Uniform Tango, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Papa to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BLY, rounds up the news in brief. And this episode's feature is a feature on the ARRL Election Committee Adventures. Now, as always, your ICQ podcast is produced for you at least fortnightly and is kept advert-free by the very kind support of you, our wonderful listeners. And our monthly subscription donors are helping us pay our way in this episode. And as I say, they send donations to us on a subscription. That gives a wonderful base for us to help us pay our way and keep our bills paid and keep a show going for you. If you find value from today's show, what we ask you to do is a very simple thing. It's called the value for value model. Turn that value you got from today's show into a monetary figure. Go to ICQPodcast.com /donate, and there's an option for you to send a donation to us. And if you can set up a subscription donation, monthly or annually, or you can send a one-off donation to show that value. So we really do hope you go to ICQPodcast.com /donate and show the value you got from today's show. Right, now we're going to join Martin, Dan, Caryn, Edmund and Ed to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including sunsetting the International Space Station repeaters and the FCC queries deregulation. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 452 of the ICQ New Podcast, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, and your new browser works much better, trust me.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, dear. Also, your side of the pond, we have Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT. Hi, Caryn.
Good evening, and good evening to our listeners as well. Great to be back.
Yeah, and I've been bothering you a little bit by sending you squirrel jokes, haven't I, at the weekend? So
I welcome the squirrel jokes. They make my day.
Yeah. Oh, I thought they'd make your day. So they have. Over my side of the pond, we have Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hiya, and good to have you. And also, over in Germany, we have Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, good evening, everybody, and good to be on again. And let's see what we get this time around.
Yeah. Well, we always find something interesting to chat about, and as I say, it'll be what it is, but it'll be fun, obviously. Right, our first one, news story. The ISS FM repeater APRS Digipeater could be silent in 2 years' time. Now, I believe Elon Musk wants to shut the International Space Station down in 2027, not 2030. So, interesting. This is when the big money starts to talk. Dan, do you want to go first on this one?
You know, all the stuff that's going on here is really just got me flummoxed. And I just don't understand what this administration has against some of these things, some of these initiatives. And that's about all I can say. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, well, as I say, I always work on the principle of tank broke, don't fix it. But obviously, there's obviously got to be a set time to deorbit. But yeah, bringing it early does seem a bit strange. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to echo that and go a little further and say who put Elon Musk in charge of the ISS. He's in charge of a lot of things, for better or worse, okay? But I believe there are agreements that govern the ISS and what it does, both in research and in communications and in amateur radio. And I think this could be challenged and should be challenged if it does seem to come to fruition. However, my guess is he's blowing smoke at the moment, and just along with all the other smoke that he's blowing, because people really do support keeping this active, keeping this alive. So I would say take a deep breath, read it for what it is, and then just wait and see.
Yeah, well, I suppose you're right, because people that are in the limelight all the time like to have their name in lights pretty much all the time. So, you could have a misinformation, but as long as your name's in lights, your name gets out there and keeps in people's minds. So, as you say, might just be that. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm in the UK, so I didn't have the opportunity to vote for Elon Musk to be in charge of the International Space Station. So this is nothing to do with me. Stating the obvious, I suppose, I really hope that it stays up there as long as possible, and that the amateur radio side of it keeps going as long as possible, because one surefire way to get youngsters interested in amateur radio is any aspect of it that involves the International Space Station. Even the most convinced youngster that amateur radio is old hat and belongs in the previous century, all that kind of thing, even they will typically get excited if you can ping a message through the space station, or hear an astronaut on board, or better still, if it's dusk, actually see the thing go over with the naked eye whilst you're transmitting or receiving signals through it. So for the sake of amateur radio, I hope it keeps going as long as possible, obviously. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, agree with you, mate, agree with you. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, we're going to keep out the politics, but what is interesting is Caryn and the others, you're not the only ones that have got an objection to this. Two very important people who have just been up on the ISS for the last 9 months without being planned to be there. That's Suni Williams, KD5LP, and Butch Wilmore. They've been there since last June because the Boeing Starliner that they went up on had problems. They've actually just come down, but they're leading with the commander of Crew 9 mission, Nick Hague, who is KG5TMV, objections to the idea that the ISS should be decommissioned in 2 years' time. Interesting comments here from, I think this is from Suni. She said, I was extremely impressed coming up here and seeing how much science is going on. When asked about Musk's comments, I would say we're actually in our prime right now. We've got all the power, all the facilities up and operating. I would think that right now is probably not the right time to call it quits, she concluded. We have probably until 2030 in our agreements. And I think that's probably really accurate, because we should make the most of this space station for the taxpayers and for the international partners and hold up our obligations. So I think she's put it very well. I mean, the system's working very well at the moment. So to shut it down now is going to be stupid, because the replacement, which will probably come from SpaceX, will take a while to get built and get put up there. And, of course, that's no longer an international space station. That's going to be a US-only one, I believe. So, what we've got up there and what the science research, what the ISS can do for the planning of the next trip to the moon and onto Mars, it's involved in all of those projects. So pulling the plug on it in 2 years' time, shall we say that Mr. Musk appears to be somewhat misinformed? Back to you, Martin.
Well, no problems at all, Ed, and nice to see you actually rolled the next news story, which is pretty much the same thing, of the USS astronauts rejecting the call for an early retirement of the ISS, and I think Suni Williams is dead right on this sort of thing. I'm going to let the others have a go on what the other astronauts have said as well, Ed. So, Edmund, what's your thoughts?
There's nothing I can say, really. I mean, they've been up there, I haven't, so I defer to their first-hand experience.
Okie dokie, well, no problems. As I say, very few of us will ever get up there. I know that for a fact. Caryn, what's your thoughts on what the astronauts have been saying?
They know it better than anybody else. They've been there. They know the value of it. They've been part of ARRS. They've been part of the science experiments. And yeah, talk about bad timing. Well, there's a lot of bad timing going on right now, and I think they're calling it for what it is. You know, they're the two who had been stranded up there. I think they speak with the greatest authority. They've been through quite a bit, and they've been through an ordeal, and they have perspective. I'm more inclined to go with them. Their motivations are not political. Their motivations are scientific. Their motivations are for the space program. I think there's too much at stake. Yes, the ISS is going to be deorbited. We know that. We know that there are already plans in the works for another one, or at least there were. I don't know if that has changed since January 21st of this year with the new administration. But why rush things? It's going to happen anyway. It's an inevitability. In 2030 there will be no ISS. Why push further? And I think they make an eloquent and very credible argument. I would sooner listen to them than anybody, really, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, no problems at all. As I say, I would guess that although they got stranded up there, if they're scientists, they probably enjoyed the extra time on the space station to be able to do what they wanted to do. So, a good one. Dan, final words on this one?
Well, the only thing I have to say about this is I just hope their comments don't fall on deaf ears, but I'm not real hopeful about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, in this world, money always talks, doesn't it? So, you got enough money, you can railroad to pretty much anybody. But that's not the right way in the world for it to happen. Right, move to our next news story. And questions loom after cuts at the US Weather Agency. Now, okay, I can't prove it, but we seem to be having far more bad weather as my lifetime has gone on. A lot more tornadoes and tsunamis and things like that could be due to global warming, but to have a cut to the weather system seems wrong in my point of view. But it is a US story, so Caryn, would you like to go first on this one?
Sure thing, Martin. Another case of bad timing. While we're following the theme of decisions made with bad timing, the weather is getting worse. Let's cut the weather agency. Hey, why not? Let's all take bets on what the weather will be next week because we don't have an agency to tell us. But you know, Martin, this is not just a US story. If you look at the bigger picture, this agency does talk to other countries, assuming they're still talking to us. You know, they connect. Canada certainly has weather systems that are shared with ours, and there is traffic that's passed back and forth, and certainly in the Caribbean as well. What impact will this have on amateur radio? It could be massive. It could be massive. You have the National Hurricane Center. You have the ham radio station there. You have the Skywarn spotters. Hams are very, very involved in weather. And, you know, when we're on the air and we have nothing else to talk about, because of course hams run out of things to talk about all the time, don't they? We talk about the weather. We're always talking about the weather, either our own weather or somebody else's weather, or what the storm system is going to be. And we're always tracking the weather and giving real time information about it, even if we're not trained spotters. So this could really cripple things if it happens. If. And once again, the good old court system could very well come to the rescue here because a lot of these cuts are being challenged. So the work of of these cuts could either be undone, could be prevented. I don't know that it's going to be a wholesale shutdown completely, but I do believe there will be a compromise. There will be a crippling. Already weather balloons have not gone up at some locations because there's not enough staffing. Now, I saw some stories about that, and apparently the weather balloons that did not go up are unrelated to these cuts, unrelated to the planned reductions. So, in fairness, these were already in the works. However, imagine now the cuts on top of that. So, what else is going to happen? Or I should say, what else is going to not happen as a result of the overlay of additional cuts? So once again, if goes according to plan, without any court challenges, without any modifications of these plans, aka threats, the results could be very, very bad. And we are entering Atlantic hurricane season now. So take that for what it is. So we'll see. I think there's going to be an awful lot of traffic in and out of the court over this one. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I don't think this one's going to roll over and die, as you say. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, one point is the NOAA is not only involved with terrestrial weather forecasting, they also gather a lot of the data we use for propagation forecasting. So amateur radio worldwide is directly affected by, or could be directly affected by, any reduction in the services from the NOAA. And yeah, so it's not just the fact that the US is going to get hit with hurricanes without knowing they're coming. It's also the fact that we might not be able to predict when we're going to be able to get some good HF propagation, or maybe not as accurately as we currently do. So, amateur radio is affected by this. There are other organizations worldwide that do provide similar data, Australia, Belgium being the two that come to mind. But having organizations like this around the world and be able to combine their data means that we can predict how propagation is going to work on HF. So it would not be a good thing for amateur radio if the NOAA was completely closed down, or even if the section that looks at space weather was closed down. That would also stop them being able to launch rockets and things, by the way. Back to you, Martin.
Right, well, there's probably a lot more that people haven't necessarily thought about. And if you don't understand what an organisation does, you can very quickly fall foul of it. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but again, I'm just flummoxed by this. The lack of thought that has gone into this is just boggles my mind. It just boggles my mind. And we're here. We're trying to figure out what repercussions this could have. That just didn't seem to enter into anybody's consideration when they did this. So, we'll have to just see what happens. That's about all you can say.
Yeah, I think we have to keep an eye. Edmund, I know this is probably something you don't do a lot of, but do you have any thoughts on this one?
Well, as the saying goes, we know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And the irony of that is that the money saved by all these cuts, potentially, when viewed through the lens of total government expenditure, probably comes to rounding errors or breakfast. In the grand scheme of things, it's going to be tiny. And I know we'll come on to talk about the Voice of America in a minute, but with the VOA, there have already been unintended and unforeseen knock-on consequences in that sphere. So it's quite possible that similar unforeseen, unintended consequences could flow from this decision about the Weather Service as well. And yes, it is political because politics arises from disagreements. So you will always have politics, but it's not party political. If the Democrats or indeed any other party had a president in charge who was doing the same things that Donald Trump is, then I would be saying exactly the same things for exactly the same reason. But overall, it's an absolutely terrible idea, the whole thing. Martin, back to you.
Yeah, certainly is. And yeah, it seems this episode we seem to be bringing you lots of horror stories of things happening. And as I say, hopefully I'll find you a nice news story in a minute, guys. As Edmund said, the next news story talks about the Voice of America and other international news services marked for cuts. Yeah, no, that's a little bit worrying as well. Dan, do you want to go first on this one?
Well, we've gone from almost here bad to worse. Again, what are these people thinking? I was listening to a report on this just the other day, yesterday, and, already other countries are jumping into this void. It's like, how do we expect people to get even a shred of objective news if the VOA goes away? Again, it just boggles my mind. I that's all I can say about it. Well, like, what are these people thinking?
I think there's people who don't understand what's happening, are the people who are making decisions, unfortunately, Dan. That's the worrying one. Edmund, go on, then I'll let you talk more about the Voice of America. What's your thoughts?
Well, most people don't tend to worry about things if they don't affect them directly. So if you are living in the US, in the UK, or other Western nations where your press is relatively free and your internet connection works far more of the time than not, it's probably quite easy to sit there in a sort of self-assured way and think, well, broadcasting internationally, particularly on shortwave, is dead. Nobody listens. It's expensive. It's a waste of time and all the usual stuff. But there are countries in the world, China, North Korea, Russia, being three of them straight off the top of my head, where no such freedoms exist. And even if they did exist, having a reliable internet connection to listen to international broadcasters online is by no means assured. So that it's a huge loss if the Voice of America goes completely off shortwave. I know that this week just gone, they were broadcasting loops of music on some frequency and news bulletins that were over a week old. But one side effect already, I'm just trying to remember here, Radio Thailand is usually on the air from a, I forget the frequency, but from a transmitter site actually in Thailand, but not 24 hours. They allow the Voice of America to, what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say sublet it, higher airtime. That's what I'm the phrase I was looking for. This last week or the last few days, Radio Thailand International has not been on the air either. So the Voice of America has disappeared, but so has Radio Thailand International. So the inference is that hiring out airtime to the VOA allowed the transmitter site to be on the air, and because the VOA have gone away, then Radio Thailand International have done likewise. And if you had asked me a week ago to sit down and think about all the possible ramifications of the VOA going away, other broadcasters disappearing from the air as well, because the transmitter sites became unviable, I don't think would have even crossed my mind. So because you can have an unforeseen consequence like that, it's quite possible that there will be other unforeseen consequences. If you cut, say, the weather service or WWV, that's another, the time signal station, that's another possible easy picking that could be targeted, where if that was cut back, there could be unforeseen consequences. So I'm hoping that somebody else, maybe the BBC World Service, will step in and start using some of these frequencies. That happened within a couple of weeks of the war in Ukraine starting. BBC started up broadcasts for a few hours a day in the 49 and 31 metre broadcast bands, I seem to remember. And they did that for very good reason. But the VOA disappearing by America's own hands, there must be people in America's adversaries who are thinking all their birthdays have come at once, because decades back they would have given anything to silence the Voice of America or Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and so on. And as I think Dan mentioned, as soon as you create a void, somebody else will step in, invariably. If you tune the bottom of the 49 metre band up to the top of the 13 metre band, so 5.9 up to 21.8 megahertz, the station that you will hear on a very regular basis is Radio China International. They are present now far more than any other station on the shortwave broadcast bands. And if you've been a shortwave listener going back several decades, you will recognise quite a few of the frequencies that Radio China International occupies these days as having belonged or being used by other international broadcasters in decades gone by, who in the intervening years have stopped broadcasting their international services on shortwave. So it's a terrible, terrible idea. I hope that the VOA can bounce back, but like I say, if they don't, and if they do disappear off shortwave altogether, I really hope that the BBC or anybody from the Western world will take up the slack, rather than allowing America's traditional adversaries to put their propaganda on the air. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, interesting what you say about all the different shortwave stations and what's been happening. Caryn, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Edmund for bringing up the that ripple effect. Had not occurred to me, but it's pretty obvious that ripple effect of when you hire out some frequency for your own program, when that goes away. We saw that happen earlier this year when the program by Radio DARC had to move and get picked up from shortwave in the UK because its longtime home at a shortwave transmitter in Austria, they had lost some of their programming, which helped foot the bill, and it just became no longer viable. So yes, that is a secondary effect of something like this. Thank you for mentioning that, Edmund. There will be repercussions for sure in shortwave in general. But I want to call attention to the fact that this is almost a continuation of what's already happening in the United States. The United States is almost, in this case, a microcosm of information shutdown that appears to be occurring globally, although it emanates from the US. If you look at US broadcasters and media in general, although print is becoming less and less of a factor here, there is a clamping down on that. Those outlets are being ostracized for whatever reasons, too many to enumerate, and the information flow is no longer coming from media outlets that at one time were considered balanced and provided both sides of an issue so that listeners, viewers, and readers could make their own conclusions and be informed and be able to decide for themselves what the truth is. And those media outlets are being snuffed out, or at least, if not snuffed out, they're certainly getting their hands tied here in the States. So, where you have international media that exists here in the States but serves a constituency outside the States, you have the identical thing happening or possibly happening now with VOA, Radio Free Europe, Radio Marti, all of those shortwave stations that serve the international audience where a free flow of information is needed. So it's no surprise because once again, it mirrors exactly what's going on here in the States in terms of suppressing content. But yeah, I actually am seeing much more clearly following Edmund's comments, the economic impact on shortwave in general. And that's really disturbing. That's just really, really disturbing because we're seeing here in the States, for other reasons, a shutdown of AM stations, local and corporate owned. So facing the not the death necessarily, but the diminishing of shortwave globally, which has already been going on, this could certainly hasten it. And just as a final postscript to that, you know, we all learn about VOA when we're students in school here in the States. I never really fell in love with the VOA and truly appreciated it in all its value and its beauty until I went to the Voice of America Museum in Ohio during 2 hamventions. In fact, I made 2 visits there. It's an independent institution. This will not be affected by cuts. I want to say that up front. It's a museum now. But my God, what a magnificent, magnificent institution it has been over the decades. And it's really, really painful. Having been there, it's really painful to me to know that this could happen. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, strong words, and hopefully people will come to their senses. Now, Ed, last words on this, but you also put a few lines in the document earlier saying what's come about today while we're recording this. So over to you, Ed.
Okay, I was actually going to come back, as Caryn did, on the point that Edmund made. ORI in Mossbrunn, near to Vienna in Austria, used to have a Christian radio station, so Bible services kind of radio station that paid for the majority of the running of that station. They dropped their contract with ORI middle of last year, which eventually meant that they could not financially keep going past the end of last year, and it was actually the end of last year that everything closed down. And yeah, Radio DARC program and others had to then move. Radio DARC moved to Compass Media in the UK as one of the last high-power shortwave stations in Europe. And if VOA stopped paying for other stations to be running, then as Edmund said, the station in Thailand that, you know, maybe VOA paid for 3/4 of it and pulled the plug, then again, it's no longer economic to run the transmitter. What has happened in a couple of cases in Germany is that the frequencies have been applied for and taken over by private. Actually, in 2 cases, owned and run by amateur radio enthusiasts, lower power shortwave broadcast stations. I don't know if that's happened in any other countries, but that's a case of when the hobbyists step in. And interestingly enough, one of the stations that transmits in English, their license actually says that they are to transmit for an audience outside of Germany. So in that license class, they're allowed to do it, so to speak. So being shortwave, that's not a problem. But I would like to also point out that although these cuts are now coming at the same time as all the other federal agency cuts, or maybe coming. The idea of closing down VOA and the group of stations that were set up, I believe, in the Second World War to counteract the propaganda from Germany and from Japan, etc., to put the opinions of the US government to the rest of the world. Those stations were already under threat last year. We had a story on ICQPodcast back, I think it was February or March of 2024, about talks of closing down at least parts of VOA. So this has been on the books for a while. No matter which party's in power in the US, it is a very expensive organisation to run. And if they honestly believe that they can get the message over by other methods than shortwave broadcasting, then it becomes, again, an economic question, not a political question, an economic question. And I think, we can turn around and say the present group that are the dodgy group that are making these cuts at the moment may be making a lot of mistakes that they'll regret. But the VOA question, I think, has been around for quite some time. I think from the fact we've talked about it a year ago, it was something that was coming anyway, but maybe it's everything gets closed down now, not just part of it. I don't know. Yeah, and I'll leave the other point, Martin. I'm not going to cover that because the listeners can go and click on the link and watch the video on it if they wish to in the show notes. There's too much there to explain in detail here. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, okay, no problems at all, Ed. Well, yeah, and it's a worrying time, and important stations like Voice of America and BBC World Service and others such alike, it'll be a sorry day when they all disappear. Right, move to our next news story, and dear, you guys in the States are getting a bit of a kick in, aren't you? The FCC seeks public suggestions on possible deregulation. Now, I know a few hams have been getting overexcited about this, but Caryn, I'm going to let you go first because you don't think it's ham related.
Yeah, this is not about deregulating ham radio. A lot of hams read this, and immediately it became a panic attack across amateur radio. My impression was, even without reading anything, the FCC has a lot under its umbrella. The FCC has a lot that is revenue related, business related. A lot of money making enterprises are under FCC regulations. I don't think amateur radio is a big ticket item, and I honestly don't think they care a whole lot about what hams do or don't do as long as it's within the law. And I don't think we're going to see any changes, maybe one or two, if even, but they're certainly not going to turn ham radio into CB as everybody seems to think it's going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Look, follow the money. There's no real benefit money wise in doing that. And this is all about, well, partly the power, but mostly the money. So follow the money. I think this will certainly hit a lot harder in the revenue areas of what FCC regulations are all about. Satellites, businesses, things of that nature. Certainly even consumer products that utilize wireless. So calm down. Calm down, people, please. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all. Well, I saw a gentleman talking about this on YouTube a couple of days ago, and it was sort of one of those panic things, and I'm thinking it can't be happening, but I was rather hoping it wasn't happening. I've nothing against the CB guys, nothing at all against you, mate. You operate within your licensing conditions. We'll operate within ours. We'll all get on together, and the bits and pieces. So you're right. This is probably nothing to do with our hobbies. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, so I'm with Caryn. I mean, let's not get too excited about this, but there are some voices out there saying, "Hey, this might be an opportunity to revamp some of the regulations that we either think are outdated or just plain bad for ham radio." And I think there's something to that. Steve, NAGNJ, has written a interesting article. I would encourage everybody to read it on his in his Zero Retries newsletter. And if you see fit, Martin, I think you might include that link in the show notes. And he has some interesting things to say about it. So, that's where I'm coming from on this too. Probably it's not going to happen, but it might be an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we never know when odd things creep out of the woodwork. But as you say, you and Caryn have said, probably won't be an amateur radio thing.
And just one more thought on that. It's unfortunate that we're not in a position right now to take advantage of that. And so another way you might look at this is it's would be an opportunity for someone to, what am I trying to say? It could be an idea to really ramp up our efforts on advocacy, because right now we're just not really in a position to take advantage of it. But if we had a group that was really working on this kind of thing, then maybe we would be in a better position to do it. So just something to think about.
Yeah. And I suppose, you've just got a new top man at the FCC, or top person at the FCC. I know he is a man this time, possibly trying to make a name for himself, probably trying to keep in with your president by shaking the tree. So this might be a tree shake. Who knows? Ed, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm a little surprised at the fact that the FCC, which is supposed to be an organisation with experts and understanding, people who normally set the rules to keep everything running nicely, are now saying, hey, businesses, tell us what we have to do. We don't know how to do our job. Tell us what we need to do. And one area I suspect, first of all, I agree with the others, this isn't amateur radio related, it's business, it's money. But the other thing that might affect amateur radio is if they come back and say, okay, we don't want to have to send our new equipment models to you to be tested before we can sell them. So the FCC approval for no incorrect radio emissions. That will mean that anything built then in the US or anywhere being sold in the US will not need to worry about the fact that they create interference across all of the HF amateur bands, for example. So if that is one of the things that comes in, then yeah, it's not good for amateur radio. But that being said, they will save some money through not testing equipment. However, so much stuff comes in from abroad into various countries without being correctly tested in any case. I suspect we're already too far down that road that we can't stop all the increasing interference anyway. But yeah, it's one of those things where we say follow the money, as Caryn said, and that's definitely what's going on here. A lot of the things we've talked about this evening have been to save money, cut outlay, so that money can be gathered together. Where does it go then? Well, I'm not going to comment on that. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it's all about the money. Edmund, do you have any thoughts on the FCC suggestions?
Well, in some ways, it's a strange question to be asking, because most people, if you ask them, do you want regulation or deregulation, would naturally say deregulation. So with a slightly mischievous hat on, I would say if I were in America, as far as I know, it's been a good decade at least since VHF television was switched off. So I would be petitioning the FCC for deregulation of the 70 megahertz 4 meter band, Martin.
Well, that would be a nice one. That would be a nice one. We have that in Europe, or large parts of Europe, and I must admit the 4 meter band is one of my favourites. So yeah, there's things could be done, but as we've all said, don't think it's particularly aimed at amateur radio. So anyway, but good thoughts, Edmund. Right, moving to our last news story. And this seems to have been a gloom and doom episode. Hopefully Colin will have some nice things in the news in brief. But work at a repeater site has cost a ham his county job in Washington State. I mean, yeah, okay. Suddenly your hobby loses you your job. That must be worrying. Caryn, I'm going to go first with you again on this one. What do you think?
Okay, I think we need to rename this program instead of ICQ podcast. I think we need to call it the Twilight Zone. It's just remarkable the lineup of stories we've had. But yes, this is sad but true. This is a ham radio operator in Washington State who had a very, very long career in government employment. I think something like 34 years, with his most recent job being public works director for the county. Also, amateur extra. Been an enthusiastic ham for many, many years. And with his club, he was going to be doing some work up at a repeater site for the club. And it's a site where there are also repeaters used by some of the county agencies. And there's also a facility there for the power company. And he needed permission to get onto the property to do that. Although in the news article, and Newsline carries the story quoting from the news article. In the news article, he indicates that, at least in principle, there was a verbal agreement that he could go, and that they supported him gaining access to this secure site to do the work. And he was in the process, again, this is all according to the newspaper article. It indicates he was in the process of drafting a resolution so that the county, the body of directors or commissioners, could vote and approve a resolution to grant him access, because he already had a key. He could get in, but this would have involved bringing people to the site who were not part of the usual folks who go up there. So members of the public would be going in, that being other members of the club. There was some problem with producing that resolution, that document, in time, and so no vote was ever taken. But given that he did have verbal support, went up there. They went up there and they did the work. The county is claiming that the work disrupted, for a short period of time, meter on the utility operation, and that it also disrupted use of the repeaters. Now, there were no emergencies that occurred. The repeaters weren't even really active at the time being used, but that it did cause a disruption in their service. As a result of that, the fellow was terminated, so he is now out of work. He issued an apology, but also indicated that this was really blown out of proportion, that his intentions were good and no harm was done. Nonetheless, business is business. The man is out of work, and so, yep, his hobby cost him his livelihood. So we figured this would be something, I guess, serving as a cautionary tale for many hams whose repeater sites abut other repeater sites or other facilities and are on property that has limited access to members of the public. An unfortunate end to the story. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know, it seems these days, if you try and do something nice and it goes wrong, you get penalised. So what's happening a lot of days is that people are just going, why should I even bother? And that worries me, because if people stop bothering, nothing will ever get done, which is a bit naughty. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, rules are rules, and if it was a secure site and he took some of the other amateurs from the club there without having written permission, well, he shouldn't have been fired. He should have been given a first warning of 3 warnings, in my opinion, because that was wrong. However, I suspect the reason he was fired was he was made a scapegoat to appease the power company or whoever there that said, yeah, he shouldn't be there and could have caused this, could have caused that. So rather than just having a strict warning, they actually fired him. I am not sure whether that could have happened in Europe or the UK with labour regulations, but obviously in the US it can happen. Yeah, he made a mistake. It's good to run the story. If you're sharing a site, any kind of site, whether it be repeater site, radio site, whatever, with other businesses or even with other radio clubs, dot the I's and cross the T's before you go in to make sure everything is okay. Because the other problem there, I suspect, is if he took 2 or 3 of the other members of the radio club in there and something happened, what would the insurance do? Would the public liability insurance cover them? Probably not. So, the regulations are there for a reason, but I don't think he should have been fired. He should have been given a stern warning that if it happened again, he'd be fired. But they've done what they've done. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it's a shame. I know when we have to do maintenance on our repeater GB3XP in the UK, in South London, it's based right at the top of a hospital, right at the top floor, and out on the roof for this hospital. And there are only basically 3 of us who ever go there normally, although other members of the club have asked. But the problem is, you can't just take people up there to have a look, because it's a fantastic views from that height and one thing and another, but you never actually do a job. And Martin Rothwell with Repeater Keeper M0SGL, who's also a presenter on here, myself and a guy called Phil from our club are probably the only 3 people that ever go up there purely these days, purely because the work has to be done. I haven't got time to keep an eye on other people wandering around on the roof. You got to go and do the job. So it's a difficult one, yeah. And the paperwork's phenomenal to do that sort of work. But there you go. Dan, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, unfortunately, the repair didn't go well, and I think that's something he wasn't counting on. But I don't know. I'm of 2 minds. First, if it did cause a communication outage that could have been dangerous for some people, then certainly some disciplinary action is required. But I mean, the guy was there for 35 years and was what was his title? He's director of something. So he obviously had moved up the ladder. So just a bad story all the way around.
Oh yeah. It's he's paid the ultimate price. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, proof, if it were needed, that verbal agreements aren't worth the paper that they're written on. I agree with what's been said before. From nothing to dismissal in one go does seem, on the face of it, rather unduly harsh. I would have thought that a formal written warning and a promise that he would be fired if he did it again would have probably sufficed, or have been enough of a dissuasion from him actually ever doing it again. And it's such a shame, because sacking somebody who's been working for you for a couple of months is one thing, but sacking somebody who's been working for you for 35 years, there or thereabouts, that's an awful lot of knowledge and experience and information in the head that will be going out of the door that it may not necessarily be straightforward or even possible to replace. So I do feel very sorry for this guy. On the face of it, he's been rather harshly treated, and I'm sure he won't do it again, obviously, but I wish him well for the future.
Yeah. Nice words to end up on, Edmund. Nice words to end up on. Okay, well, that's the end of our news stories. Let's find out what the guy's been up to. Now, normally I let Caryn go first as ladies first. But, Dan, you have a hard stop and you may have to disappear before we say 73s. So I'm going to let you go first, Dan. What have you been up to since the last time we spoke on the podcast?
Well, thank you, Martin. Well, mostly I've been to Hamfest lately, which is kind of amusing. One was really good. One was very well attended, and the last one, which I went to this Sunday, not quite so well attended. But I was feeling pretty good about the first one because, like I said, there was pretty good attendance and even some young fellows there, which was nice to see. And sold a lot of books, sold a lot of stuff, and so just had a lot of fun doing that. Still haven't gotten out on POTA yet. I had the opportunity actually last week, but I kind of wimped out on that. I did the last POTA I did last fall. I somehow the fiberglass mast I'm using, the spider beam fiberglass mast I'm using, got stuck in the holder. And I couldn't get it out for the life of me. And the problem with that is that I couldn't close it properly. These things have the storage tube has on one end has a screw-on cap, and because that spider beam was so tightly stuck in there, I couldn't get it out, and so I couldn't close it up. But I went to a ham club meeting yesterday, and between a couple of us, we managed to get it apart. So anyway, I'm loaded for bear on POTA now, and looking forward to that. So that's basically what I've been up to. Of course, still doing my 3 CW contacts a day. So that's it.
Well, sounds good. Sounds like you really have been having fun. So that's a good one, Dan. And I'll say that's very interesting. Caryn, what have you been playing with since the last time we spoke on the podcast?
Well, first of all, I will invite Dan to a park-to-park contact, which I look forward to happening this year when we're both out doing POTA. I'm back out. I am back out, and my reward for being really patient and getting back out and doing POTA is there is a new park right within a 10 or 15-minute drive from my QTH, and I've gone there, and it is just beautiful. It's the kind of park I love to activate because it is wild, and it's a forest, and it's just beautiful. So I've been back there twice. I did a little hike as well there after I had done my POTA activation, and I will probably be going back again very, very soon, both to activate and to hike, because I want to go deeper into the woods. And knowing my sense of direction, it's probably a good idea if I take somebody with me or adopt a bloodhound or some kind of navigating dog. So POTA's been great. POTA's been great, and I look forward to more of that. This coming weekend, a really fun activity, the Randomgram, which is a CW activity that the Straight Case Century Club does. Basically, you copy as many coded messages as you can, 5-character messages that are sent. They're totally random. They mean absolutely nothing, and it's so much fun. So I'm looking forward to doing that. That will be Saturday into Sunday, and I'm going to try to do as many hours of that on and off as I can. In the case of this activity, you both send the coded messages that are assigned to you, but you also get credit for copying some of the messages that others have sent. So that's also nice. I had an idea planted in my head, which I'm just going to let it sit for the moment. which is if I decide to do more hiking and POTA, I may want to invest in a radio that's a little more carryable than my beautiful FT891. I just don't want to restrict myself to QRP, so that may not work out, but I do want to know that I can hike into deeper woods and not have to carry what I have right now, which is an awful lot of stuff. Even for portable, it's fine for portable, but not for hiking and portable operation. And finally, although I did not attend any of the forums, I did stop in at HAMSI, which is the Citizen Science Investigation group that uses amateur radio input. They did the Eclipse, the 2 Eclipse QSO parties. I had a friend, Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, who was attending for the 2 days, and it was in beautiful downtown Newark, New Jersey, which is somewhat drivable from my QTH, drivable in spite of the New York City traffic that you have to go through to get there. And Neil said, "Are you coming?" And I said, "Well, I won't be attending any of the forums, but I'll be happy to meet you for lunch because, who can turn down food, right?" So I made the trip and had a great time with Neil. Got to meet Nathaniel Fursell, who created HAMSI. Got to meet a few other folks who I have spoken to in the past, but never had eyeball QSO with. So for me, it was a little bit like a mini hamvention, and it was wonderful. So that's been my life, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, it sounds like you're having fun. And well, a couple of times I've met Neil Rapp, real nice guy, and I'm sure you and him had a great lunch. He's a real nice guy on that one. So that's a good one, Caryn. Right, Edmund, have you been playing radio or have you been busy?
I've been busy and not really done any radio at all. Yet again, partly because the weather's been so terrible. We seem to have had huge amounts of rain, grey skies, and not much sunshine ever since the start of the new year. However, in April, I'm going to up my game and I'm actually going to be on the air, hopefully a fair bit. This is a good news story to contrast some of the stories we've had in the podcast thus far. In April 1925, there was a meeting in Paris, and from that sprang forth the IARU, the International Amateur Radio Union. So to celebrate the centenary in April, the RSGB has managed to negotiate with Ofcom to obtain a special call sign, which is Golf Bravo 0 India Alpha Romeo Uniform GB0 IARU. Several things are special about it. Number one, there are 4 letters in the suffix, whereas normally you can have a maximum of 3. Number 2, it is valid for the entirety of April, so the full 30 days, whereas normally a special event call sign in the UK is limited to 28 days maximum. And thirdly, it is not tied to a specific location, so the call sign is the same, whether it's being operated from England, Wales, Scotland, the Isle of Man, Northern Ireland, Jersey or Guernsey. And also, when an individual operator is using it, it doesn't have to be at a particular location, as I understand it. So, for example, if I was doing a special event station in my own right, I would have to declare the address where it was happening, and it would only be allowed to happen at that address. So if I had one here at my home location and I found that 40 metres, say, that I wanted to use was completely unusable because of QRM from nearby neighbours, then basically I would be stuffed. I wouldn't be allowed to stick some radio gear in a bag, walk 5 minutes down the road to the beach and set up my inverted V next to the water's edge. Whereas if I'm operating GB0 IARU, I can do that, as I understand it, although I will double, triple, quadruple check that point. So I've signed myself up, and the RSGB have said that any current RSGB member who is also a full license holder and who resides in any of the 7 DXCC entities that I just mentioned, they can apply to operate this call sign. And if you apply, don't see why you wouldn't be accepted. I mean, they accepted me, didn't they? You'll be given access to a spreadsheet which is viewable by everybody from the entry on the qrz.com page if you wanted to have a look. There are 30 workbooks at the bottom, one for each day. And for every day, there is a rota from midnight till 6 a.m. in one 6-hour slot, then 6 a.m. till the following midnight in 2-hour slots. And if you want to go on the air and use the call sign, as long as the slot isn't taken, you can put your call sign in, your personal call sign in, and you can do that weeks in advance, or it can be an on-the-spot thing 60 seconds beforehand. And all the RSGB have said is they would like you to operate as much as possible. So say I put my call sign in on 40 metres SSB between 8 and 10 one morning. There's no rule that says I would have to start on the stroke of 8 o'clock and finish on the stroke of 10 o'clock. But they simply say that they want you to be as active as possible in the slot that you sign yourself up for. And GB0 IARU will be active on every band from 160 metres top band through to 6 metres, with the exception of 60 metres. There's not any activity on 5 megahertz. And the modes to be used are SSB, CW, FT8, FT4, and RTTY. So no AM or FM. So theoretically, I mean, it's all done by volunteers, so realistically this isn't going to happen, but theoretically the call sign could be active on every HF band bar 60 metres 24 hours a day in 5 different modes all the way across. So as far as I can tell, all you have to do is work the station once during the month on any band, any mode, and you then qualify for the nice, attractive QSL card if you want it. There's no sort of cumulative contests where you have to work the station X number of times on Y different number of bands using Z number of different modes. It's simply one QSO and that's it, you get the card. So if I've understood that right, on the face of it, the second half of the month could be a bit calmer and quieter than the first half, because I imagine there will be pile-ups, probably, and in the opening days or weeks you'll probably have the big gun stations fighting it out, trying to get in the log. So I will be primarily active in the second half of the month, I think, when things have calmed down a bit. And the RSGB have encouraged sort of short, snappy contest-style exchanges rather than rag chews, unless the band is unusually quiet, in which case you can talk a little bit more. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge for me to try to rein myself in a bit. And one final thing to say about this, which I think is really good, is that in the guidance on the RSGB website, they've gone out of their way to say that they want people who have 100 watts and a wire stations to operate the call sign. They're not purely interested in having big gun stations with linear amplifiers and massive beam antennas. They want quote unquote normal stations. Hesitate to describe myself as normal, but you know what I mean, probably. They want normal sort of little pistol stations to activate this call sign, as well as the big guns. So if you're in the UK, if you're a full license holder, if you're an RSGB member, then I would encourage you to, at the very least, think about taking part in this. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun, and all the information you could ever need is on the qrz.com page, including hyperlinks onwards to the RSGB website. So have a look. Good luck if you take part in this, either as an operator, and good luck indeed to everybody who tries to get this call sign in their log. And if you're listening to this in a country where English is not the first language, on the occasions that I'm operating GB0IARU, I will attempt, probably very badly, to say a few words of greeting in your own language, because as Dan quite rightly reminds me, sometimes one of the purposes of amateur radio is being ambassadors for your country and spreading international goodwill. And herein ends the monologue. Back to you, Martin.
Right, so you are going to be a busy boy. That's a good one. Ed, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
Well, with the danger of changing this podcast into a POTA podcast, that's been one of the major things I've done. I've actually done 9 POTA activations since the last time I appeared on ICQ, like 4 weeks ago. So that's quite a lot for me, especially considering the weather hasn't been that great. But I've been concentrating on trying to activate all the local parks and trails around here that I hadn't activated yet. And like 2 weeks ago, there's like 3 or 4 new trails popped up. So I've even been able to find situations where there have been what in POTA you call a twofer or a threefer, where at one location you're actually on a trail in a park, or you're on where 2 trails meet, or 3 trails meet, or 2 trails meet in a park. So the end result there is you're effectively getting 3 activations or 2 activations for the price of 1. So yeah, and quite often these have been early morning activations, just running 20 watts to loaded vertical, and been working into VK3, VK7 on 20 meters sideband long path. You know, it's something you get on the band at the right time, and you're lucky with the propagation. It's amazing what you can do just with 20 watts of SSB. So, Caryn, for you, I think I've mentioned this before, but the Xiegu G90 is becoming almost the de facto portable radio for a lot of stations around the world, especially in Europe and the UK. It is 20 watts. It's not QRP, but it's at that nice spot where it's a small, rugged unit and doesn't flatten your batteries too quickly. So it's the sweet spot. 20 watts, 25 watts on HF. You're not going to notice that much difference going to 50 watts or 100 watts. So it may be worth considering, and they come, you know, they're like $300 to $400 depending on whether there's an offer on or whatever, over $350 and $440 or whatever I've seen over the last couple of months. So they're like half or a third of the price of the big names. But I've had mine now 5 or 6 years, and it's been bashed around, and it's all good. Anyway, enough of the advertising. We don't want that either. But still on POTA, for those who are either in POTA or interested and want to get on and hear what's going on, 4 times a year, there's an event called Support Your Park. And the next one of that, the spring one, is on April 19th and 20th. So that's a good time to get on and do some POTA or to listen around and call. The other thing, the main other thing I've been doing since last time on here is continuing the preparation for International Dog Day in August. Yeah, so as always, a plug here for the website, which is dogdayradio.org. And yeah, so all information are up there. We're at the stage of getting our special call signs sorted out, etc. And all going well. And obviously more about that as we get closer to August. But in the meantime, there's going to be a few more POTA activations, and now the weather's better, perhaps some HEMA and SOTA as well. Portable ops, once you get into spring, is a lot more easy to do than middle of winter. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you've been very, very busy, and it's very, very interesting. And I will also agree with you, the Zygo G90 is a lovely radio. I've only had mine a year, and very impressive. And you can knock it down, turn the power down to QRP if you really want. But the 20 watts, as Ed said, is quite a nice sweet spot, and does very well on the battery. Your battery you take out with you. Right, what have I been up to? Not as much as I'd like. 3 weeks ago, I think you guys would have heard on the last podcast, Mrs. B had a full knee replacement. I've had to step up and do lots of things that she would normally do. In fact, I've been cooking, and I haven't poisoned her or killed her off, as half the club members asked me the other day. But we're getting through it, and Mrs. B's recovering quite nicely. Downside of that is, and I've told the Dover Rally, the ICQPodcast won't be at the Dover Rally in a couple of weeks' time. I can't leave her for all day hobbling around trying to get things done. So that's the important one. Was on the talk group a few times, had a really nice discussion, and I should have written the lady's call sign down. An M7, Dana, I think her name was, and she is in Harrow. And she came up, had a chat with me on the talk group, which was quite nice. 30 seconds after that, my good friend Phil, VK6ADF, came up. So I said to her, have a chat with VK. And she had a chat with Phil down there in VK land, VK6, via our talk group, I know. But it's nice for a foundation license holder to get that in. And later on, I spoke to her friend as well, who came up. His call sign is M0LPZ, I believe. So, yeah, a couple of nice chats there, and a chat with Phil a couple of times on the talk group. So I've tried to be on the talk group a bit more at the moment, because I'm not out and about. Just over a week ago, I got given a multimeter, and you go, so what? This is an Avo 8 Mark I. It was produced between 1951 and 1954. It is almost immaculate. And the guy was going to throw it in a bin. I got really upset and said, no, you can't do that. So I brought it home. I cleaned the ohms reset pots and fitted a couple of batteries, and it is just a gorgeous meter. Don't really need it, but it's just a gorgeous meter. I have a Mark V, but this is a Mark I, very early one. And as I say, if you don't know what I'm talking about in the States, have a look at Avo 8 Mark I on Google. You'll see it's a big meter. Back in the 1950s, it would have been used as a workshop come laboratory meter. It wouldn't have been a field meter. So there you go. I also got given a couple of books, and the Book of Wireless Telegraphy, volumes 1 and 2, published in 1938 for the Admiralty. Really, really interesting books, and yeah, very, very technical. I'm going to spend time slowly working my way through that and thoroughly enjoying it. And last but not least, I did join the Pennine Hams group a couple of times last week. I did join their club meeting last week, where Steve Nichols gave a really interesting talk on propagation, and I joined the net on the Thursday as well, which is always good fun. So that's what I've been up to. Not terribly amount of radio, but I'm still trying to keep Mrs. B under control and making sure she don't do anything that's going to injure her knee, and make sure she recovers properly. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank the guys for turning up, and we'll move to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT.
Thank you, Martin, and I wish everybody good cheer in spite of the somewhat somber theme of this newscast. We'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, no problems, Caryn. I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, and to the listeners, all the best. See you in 2 months' time. I'm on holiday for the next one.
Yeah, Carol did ask where you were going, but we'll talk offline on that one. But yeah, enjoy your holiday. And also, I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
That's great. And Dan has had to leave early. Don't worry about Dan. He's doing something else for the ICQPodcast at the moment, so I thank him for that as well. So all that's left for me to do is say 73s, guys, and we'll move to the next part of the podcast. 73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. Start off with news here that the RSGB is introducing a new web app. Now they've just launched the web version of the app, and it's a one-stop shop for all RADCOM publications and newsletters. It gives members easy access to over 10 years worth of back issues of RADCOM, as well as copies of RADCOM Basics and RADCOM Plus. Further back issues of RADCOM will be added to the archives on the coming months, and hopefully make it a more valuable resource for members. You'll need your RSGB membership portal details to access the editions. So we'll put links to this for you on the ICQ Podcast webpage, and hopefully that's a valuable resource for you to check out. Special event station time now for you to celebrate 200 years of British train travel. Multiple stations will be celebrating this across the Great Britain throughout 2025, organised by the British Railways Amateur Radio Society. Look out for call signs GB2 Tango Tango, GB0 Lima Mike Romeo, GX4 Lima Mike Romeo, GB1 Foxtrot Romeo Tango, and GB2 Sierra Delta Romeo. They're going to be active throughout the year. There's an award certificate available for working all the special event stations, and QSL cards for individual contacts for individual stations. So certainly look out for those, and say happy hunting for those call signs and those awards. ARRL Field Day is coming up at the end of June, and the theme has been announced, and it's Radio Connects, highlighting the many ways that wireless technology connects people across distances near and far. The event, as always, is park picnic, camp out, practice for emergencies, informal contests, and most of all, fun. So, as I say, get your thinking caps on of how you can potentially join in, and using the theme of Radio Connects. So that's the ARRL theme for Field Day this year. And we finish off with a mail received from Stefan Latimer, Mike 0 Oscar Sierra Lima. Thanks for dropping us a line. He says, hi, Colin, Martin and the team. Could you possibly let people know about Meals on the Air, which is coming up? So Meals on the Air, as they're taking place at the weekend of Saturday the 10th on the 11th of May. It's not a contest, it's just a simple aim of bringing together amateur radio operators and clubs to promote the hobby, whilst helping to preserve some of the wonderful heritage of our windmills and water mills. And now even places like tidal mills, treadle mills or horse mills are also, of course, allowed to join in the fun. So I say, if you've got a location nearby you'd like to get activated, etc., you can find out a way of getting involved. They've got a new website which we'll publish on the ICQ Podcast webpage for you, so you can get involved with the team there. So look out for that. That's Meals on the Air, which will be taking place on Saturday the 10th and 11th of May. So thanks a lot, Stefan, for dropping us that line. Right, now we have our feature this episode, which is the ARRL Election Committee Adventures. As always, hope you enjoy.
And Now for this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Frank, K4FMH for the ICQ podcast. Along with me today is Dan, KB6NU. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Frank. How's it going?
Oh, it's going well. We're surviving weather, and you're surviving another podcast recording already before this interview that we're recording here. So we are busy, and we earn every penny of our salary on the podcast, don't we, Dan?
We do. We really do.
We certainly do. Today, Dan and I have three special guests who may be very familiar to our U.S. audience and perhaps our international audience. These three individuals are not only active ham operators, but they also have another characteristic in common. They were recently disqualified to stand for election as the division director and board member by the ARRL Ethics and Elections Committee. And you may not be totally aware of what that is. And not every ham is going to be aware of what divisions are. You might not know that it's the board member who is the division director. Now, Dan's going to give us an introduction for listeners who don't really understand how the league's organized. What are divisions and directors, and how are they elected, and who elects them? Dan?
Sure. Thanks, Frank. So the ARRL is, on paper, a democratic organization. By that, I mean the members of the ARRL elect a board of directors, which then sets the policy for the organization. They don't run the organization per se. That's up to the CEO and the staff, but they're supposed to set policy. And the board is made up of 15 people elected by members in 15 different divisions. Every year, a third of them are up for election. So, every year, 5 of them stand for election. And people can submit nominating petitions, then, like I say, stand for election. And this provides some continuity, right? Because only 5 directors are theoretically replaced every year. It does allow for some new voices to be elected to the board. The board of directors actually is responsible for overseeing the organization too. So, for example, they are responsible for hiring new CEOs, evaluating their performance, and making replacements if necessary. What happened this year was kind of odd because even though there were 5 elections, in 3 of those elections, people opposing the incumbents in those divisions were disqualified from the elections. We have those 3 gentlemen here today, and we're going to talk about what happened in this election. So that's basically it. Back to you, Frank.
Thanks, Dan. Great overview. And sections, which is probably the unit in the ARRL that hits closest to home. I think most hams who are members of ARRL know who their section manager is. Those feed up to make up the division. Now, our guests today include Jim Tallons, N3JT, Dan Marler, K7REX, and Fred Hopengarden, K1VR. I'll ask each one in turn to briefly tell our listeners who they are and what your service has been to amateur radio. Jim, let's start with you.
Okay. Jim N3JT, first license in 1960. Hard to believe. I'm that old. I'm not really that old. I was licensed before I was born. Some time ago, I was approached by a current director of ARRL to run for the Roanoke Division directorship. Keeping in mind that I spend half the year in Florida and half the year in Virginia, I asked the question, would that disqualify me? And the answer was 2 questions. Where do you have your station? And where is your radio activity? Not only the station, but generally. Turns out that I vote in Florida, but my station is in Virginia. Now, we look at the rule itself, and the rule at the time, and I think until it's changed, states specifically that a qualification is possible if you are a resident of the division and a member of ARRL at the time of application for directorship. And the answer to all those questions was yes. It did not say anything about legal residency, ham radio residency. I am, after all, the resident of 2 states. I am a resident of Virginia. I mean, I have a home there. I pay $13,000 a year now in real estate taxes. My cars are registered there. But in Florida, I vote. And so I submitted the application. And after several procedures, which involved an appeal to the E&E, it was decided that since I vote in Florida, I am not a legal candidate under the rule. The rule, as written, has been undermined by interpretation, motivated, I think, quite clearly by the knowledge and influence of Mr. Minster, who knows that I and others are not fond of the lack of transparency and some of the policies that have been implemented at ARRL. And so those of us who would confront him with opposing positions have been curiously disqualified. That's the sum and substance of what happened to me. And I should add that I had $5,000 by a GoFundMe campaign offered to me, which I refunded to every donor. A lot of support. But N2ZZ, who was the incumbent, complained that I was not a resident, and so I was disqualified. After this happened, I wrote a summary of what I just told you on my QRZ.com page.
It's outstanding. It's something that every listener should read.
Well, it was factual, without emotion, just stating what happened. After that appeared, I say 3 or 4 days later, I got a telephone call from Minster's secretary saying he wants to meet me in Washington, D.C. at his lawyer's office, keeping in mind that at that time I was in McLean, Virginia, so it wasn't too far away. Thought about that, and I said, no, hey, why don't you tell him to come to my house, and we'll have a pizza or something. We'll have fun, whatever. And nothing happened to that. He decided not to come. I got another call some days later saying Mr. Minster reports that he got death threat. Didn't say that it was because of what I had written, but it would seem pretty obvious that that statement, whether true or not, was meant to, and by the way, he repeated that at the Hamcation a couple of months ago in Florida, where I sat and listened to him speak. He's a salesman at heart, but he's malevolent when it comes to challenge. The other call I got, I suppose motivated by a call in turn for Minster, was from Mickey Baker, who is on the E&E committee and the Florida director, who actually, and I haven't had this happen very often in recent years, but yelling at me. And when I say yelling, I mean at 30 dB above normal volume on the telephone, calling me a liar at least 5 times, a cheat, and that he was going to report me to the Florida authorities for tax evasion. And his theory was, quite incorrectly, that I had claimed homestead status, which means a tax reduction on real estate based on my claim of residency. As you are not a resident of Florida, he said, because you have a residence in Virginia and you registered your cars in Virginia, your station, you're claiming now to be a resident of Virginia. And I said, I can be a resident of Virginia, but for voting purposes, for tax purposes, there are residency definitions for all of those things. And I am. And I said that very calmly, more calmly than I am to you now. And he continued screaming and threatened to report me. He kept on about that, and finally he calmed down and apologized for having spoken to me that way. But I did not respond and thought that was an interesting coda to the events that had happened before that. He promised after the next election, or after January 1st at some point, to appoint me as an assistant Florida director, whatever that meant. I said, fine. Of course, I haven't heard from him, and I wouldn't accept the position.
Yeah, it's what I call a volunteer flunky. I actually are one, as Pogo would say. And so it's a really prestigious job that you have about zero influence or power. So I'd advise you to consider it, Jim, if you're so inclined.
I have, and I've rejected it. Thank you very much. I think that summarizes what happened to me and where we stand. I did not raise my hand. I've never confronted Minster publicly over all of this. I'm not sure what's to be gained by that. He's a very, very clever marketing person. That's his background. And he's been known for not necessarily telling the entire truth. So I have never confronted him. He knows of me, and I am sure I am not on his Christmas list.
Jim, let me ask you a little bit. Now, what is your what's your profession?
I actually have 2 of them. I was originally an electrical engineer, but then I got an MBA, which was useless at the time because it was a recession. So I went to law school. I was going to be a patent lawyer. And then the FCC was interviewed at my law school campus. It was like God coming to earth, because I am from age 13. So I decided to take the job offered to me at the FCC. So I was a Federal Communications Commission attorney for 22 years, followed by 5 years at Steptoe and Johnson, which is a prestigious Washington, D.C. law firm.
Much.
Followed then in turn by my own practice for a number of years, which is now tapering off. And in deference to bicycling and swimming.
So as a ham, you're sort of in league with Riley Hollingsworth in that you've been an attorney for the Federal Communications Commission. You know your way around the FCC.
I think that's an accurate statement.
Okay. I want our listeners to know that. I think that's important because it speaks to what you would have brought the position that you applied to be a candidate for. So I wanted
Because I'm an engineer and a lawyer, so I can
Correct.
understand both, right?
Correct. You bet. Okay, that's in a nutshell what happened to you, Jim. Dan, tell us about you and what your experience was.
Well, I'm assuming you're talking to me, Dan. And
Yes, Dan Marler. Sorry.
hey, that's okay. Well, like Jim, I was approached, asked to run. There is and still is a concern over the lack of being transparent. I run a twice a week program called Rat Pack, and
it's outstanding. I'll just say, as a fanboy of what you do with Rat Pack, Michelle Thompson and some others have recommended that to me in months past, and it's a wonderful program. So let me applaud you.
Well, thank you. I have a team that I put together. Actually, that team has changed over the years. Some of them are still there, some of them are new. I'd like to keep some fresh things going on. And anyhow, Rat Pack I have made it very clear in previous presentations that I am very much for transparency. I've been a ham since 1961, and I've held most of the field ARRL field positions. I am now currently, and have been for the last 5-6 years, the section manager for Idaho. Anyway, so I was approached to run for director. I agreed because the director is in there now does not come across as being as transparent as he could be. And I really believe in transparency. That's what bottom line is here.
Tell our listeners who your director is for your division.
Well, Mark Darb, KB7H, and he's a neat person. He's a nice person. He's a likable person. He just to say that he is very much in bed with Mincer, and I need our director to be in bed with the people who put him in the office that work for the members. That's who they need to be loyal to. And had I won the election, my loyalty would have been to the members. There were a few people at headquarters that are well aware of that because of my things I've done on Rat Pack, and they didn't really want me in that role play. So anyway, that's how we got up to the bat with the bat. We started putting out our information, the website and the cards and all the things you do to run for office. And my opponent wasn't doing anything. He did send out a full color, very expensive postcard. I don't know what it cost him, considering what I know it cost me. He had to be in that thing for $5,000. That is a hunk of change. But to my knowledge, he wasn't servicing otherwise. We couldn't find it. And really, I was running for the office. I wasn't running against him, if you know what I mean. So I made myself clear. I would put out emails to the group, to the members of our division, reference to the election. At one point, Mickey Baker called me. He's the director of the E&E board. He called me and he said that I had some stuff on my website that he didn't quite approve of. I asked him what it was, and I said, I can take it down. That's not a problem, and I did. And
so he personally didn't approve of it. Did he cite anything in the bylaws that it violated?
No. He just he quoted what it was, and it was pretty mild. I didn't, So in those kind of changes, I don't, So there's no big argument. Nothing was other than the email exchanges we had. And so I took that part out of what was being said there. And we're moving along. It was some of the things that was being fired at me. You get suspicious that they're really watching you. And that's kind of the flags I had going there. But at any rate, trying to make this as short as possible, I put out an email to all the members in our division, and I outlined the things that I saw as being wrong with ARRL's practices, and I documented them. I put out the information, and I put out where that information came from. I made sure it was all, up and up. I got a call from Scott Yellman, N8SY, telling me I had to take that down. And I says, why? It's all, and he says, no, it's not. It's lies. And I says, no, it's not, Scott. And he says, well, I need for you to prove it and take care of it. Well, the proof was already out there. I already attached it with the information there. I believe in transparency, and there it was. At any rate, Scott, he gave me, I'll time frame, like 24 hours or something like that, to get that thing corrected. Scott was not the chairman, and the prior person who called me was the chairman, Mickey Baker. And I was under the understanding that Mickey Baker was calling the shots. I did not know how Scott got in there. He was on the committee, but he wasn't the chairman. And why was he taking this over? Why was he calling me, not Scott? Or not Mickey? And was he freelancing?
Well, hey, Scott, as you know, and just to make sure our listeners know, he is now chair. He was not then. He may have known he was going to be the chair.
I do not know the situation except at that time. And so at any rate, I asked that I get that information from Mickey. Just, have Mickey give me the information, what he wants me to do. That made Scott mad. I mean, he's got an interesting temper. At any rate, made him mad, and he gave me 24 hours or less to take it down. We looked it over, and there was nothing to take down. Everything was just as he had outlined. It was supposed to be there, but he had sent in an email to outline what I was supposed to do, and it had already been taken care of. And since in that 24-hour period, part of that was like Sunday or something, so it kind of handicapped getting some things done. So I put it out there with a follow-up in the same information. I says, I'm required to identify and take this information. I put it all out there. At that point in the junction, I got a call from Scott saying I was going to be disqualified. Well, I got disqualified. Apparently, Scott was the guy that pulled the trigger. Minter, in a meeting he had, said that I was disqualified because I was argumentative and not working with the E&E committee. That was his reasoning then. Later, and since then, on several occasions, when my name has come out to him, he says that I was disqualified because I was a damn liar. Well, it's kind of hard to, the lies were all documented there. So he can say what he wants, and he's got every right to say what he wants. I was up forward, truthful, and honest, and it was no lies. It was all true. So
but then, there's no political statement that, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And facts, if they're observable, external to the person presenting them, i.e., it's not just in your own mind, they are objective facts. And you can argue about them. You can present more facts, but it's kind of hard to say an observable fact is a lie. And that's what you had. You had facts that you had pulled together.
I had pulled together. I had several resources to get these from, which I knew to be true, people I trusted, and with the documentation that verified every one of them. I wasn't just talking out of the bag. I was saying something, and this is word this and either give it a link or the area where that information came from. So everything was documented and backed up, so that I was not lying. Several people got involved about this time when I got disqualified. Several people followed through on that. I got calls from several lawyers telling me I had every right in the world to sue them and yada. I'm not after suing anybody. I was trying to run for an office, and I was doing it as honestly and straightforward as possible. It's quite obvious that we had some different opinions back in Connecticut, and so. 1 minute I'm running, the next minute I'm not, because I wasn't bowing. I guess that's the way to put it.
This is the theme that Jim mentioned, and you've now mentioned it as well. We'll see what Fred's experience has been in a moment. But there's an unstated requirement to genuflect to the CEO. It sounds like. Is that what I'm hearing from both you and Jim?
Well, Jim, the CEO is not supposed to be, according to their own rules, is not supposed to be involved with the election whatsoever. I think that we can safely assume from all the things that Jim and I experienced, and I might probably speak for Fred too, that obviously there was some input coming in from somebody, and it was probably the CEO. That's speculation. There's no facts behind that, but there was something going on there in the backhand there.
Yeah.
In the case of Jim, case of me, they were making up the rules as they went. Later, in the case of Jim, they're now trying to make the rule that they made up then, try to make it a rule now. But it wasn't a rule then. And if it's not a rule, you can't enforce it. They were made on the fly. to get the results they wanted. It was not a fair election because of that. Oh, I also add there was other things besides us three that was going on in the background, working against people they did not want in office. It was an eye-opener to me. I really was an eye-opener to me.
You know, I'd also like to ask you, I heard that you were actually disqualified after the voting had started.
Yes, the voting had started. So a lot of these people were voting for me. I'll never know how many. There were several complaints afterwards about that. They voted for somebody that wasn't on the ticket because of what they did. And going back, my personal experience, I think it all centered around Scott's temper. He was upset because I wasn't jumping to his demands. He was not the chairman. He was a member. Okay, and I wasn't jumping to his commands. That made him madder heck. And Minister or whoever went along with it, but what the heck? Buddy's a buddy. The rest is history.
But Dan, every time you agreed to make a correction in response to their assertions, which were not correct, you did what you could, and they still disqualified you because they interpreted what you stated as facts in a way to give them justification for disqualifying you. Absolutely contrary to any logic or any fair reading of what you had done. I remember that.
Yes, there was quite an exchange going on at that time. Lots of emotions seem to be in play. It's interesting. When you're running for office, any other office, as you alluded to earlier, Frank, most of the time you run. You throw your hat in the ring. I'm going to run. You get your all your sources together to run, and you present your case. And this is what I want. This is if you elect me. This is what I want to do for you, and so forth. That isn't how it works with the league.
They wouldn't let you say what you would do. Or what your policies were. You couldn't claim that there was lack of transparency because they would say that's a lie. You couldn't say that you would expand the education of kids because that's already being done. It's all this kind of stuff. They set the stage, they set the script, and they ran the script so that you could not run. Same with me.
And what the changes to their proposal now, what they put on the board would make what they did perfectly legit. But it wasn't then. Right. They are now trying to make real what wasn't real then.
We want to come back to that, and that both of you have given us a very good flavor of the specifics, and we're going to come back to the themes that you've raised. Let's hear from Fred. Now, Fred, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Hopengard?
Correct.
Thank you very much, Fred. What was your experience?
Well, I'll begin by saying that I do believe in the wisdom of the electorate. And I think what you're hearing in the two previous stories, and you will hear in mine, is that the wisdom of the electorate is not well regarded by all of those concerned. They seek to protect folks who are electors, the people who cast votes. In my case, I filed my petition the night before the deadline, and the ARRL office opened in the morning, and I don't know if they opened at 8 or 9 that day, but in any event, they notified me at 11:05 a.m. that I was missing the petition signatures piece of the application to be a candidate. Gosh, I hate when I fail to attach something, but that's what I did. I failed to attach something. I was notified at by email, timed at 11:05 a.m., but I was out of my office. I got back to my office shortly after noon and filed that attachment that I had failed to file the night before at 12:27. So I was 27 minutes late, and the Ethics and Elections Committee declared that I was ineligible. So I went and looked at eligibility in the bylaws. You have to be a full member of the league. I've been a life member since 72, and I started being a member at 56. There's no dispute I'm a full member of the division, which is also a requirement. I attested to my eligibility, willingness to run, and willingness to assume the office if elected, another eligibility requirement found in bylaw 18. And then with respect to the eligibility of candidates for director and vice director, the Ethics and Elections Committee shall apply the applicable procedural and substantive provisions of the conflict of interest policy. Well, I don't have a conflict of interest, and I had attested to it. But in any event, I was still declared ineligible, even though I believe I met every element of eligibility, for failure to include that attachment by noon and filing it 27 minutes late.
Fred, let me ask you, what are your capabilities of reading bylaws and preparing documents? Do you have any training and practice in that?
By trade, I'm a lawyer and have been a member of the bar for over 50 years.
So this is old hat to you, is doing this, and plus knowing date and time stamps. I'll bet you have a court clerk that you're familiar with that reads date and time stamps too, don't you?
Happens everywhere.
Yes. Okay. I'd want our listeners to know here's someone like Jim who is extremely prepared to dot the I's and cross the T's of something, quite frankly, as pedestrian as applying for a volunteer position in a hobby organization as opposed to some litigation in court or what have you. So go ahead.
Yes, it's all right. I have 3 university degrees from Colby, Boston College, and Harvard, and I'm a member of 2 bar associations, the DC Bar and the Maine Bar. And filing things is what I do for a living. This one occasion, I discovered that unlike in most occasions in my life, there was no opportunity for a motion to enlarge the time for filing, which is what happens in courts and towns. And when the matter went, on my request, to the full board, it needed the votes of the board to be eligible for review by the board. And I had only 5 votes for review by the full board. In other words, somebody up there doesn't like it. But in any event, I did, in fact, file 27 minutes late, and that's why I did not appear on the ballot.
Well, and we can say LOTW for things not appearing on time and kind of leave that as a humorous comment. The league sometimes is late too.
Yes, I would point out that no one was prejudiced by the inadvertent and unintended 27-minute gap. It didn't cause any harm to another candidate. It's not a lot of time, and the whole delay could have been avoided if the secretary to the CEO had notified me a little earlier instead of just 55 minutes before the noon time for filing. Again, my original filing was the night before, and I thought I had a good faith intent to meet all the requirements to be certified and stand for election, and yet I was not to be put on the ballot. That's the bottom line of it all.
Let me put Fred, didn't they gave you what, 20, how much time did they give you to file that piece of paper?
55 minutes was the time stamp from the secretary to the CEO that I had failed to attach the signature page. But I wasn't in my office at that time.
Right, but they gave you that extra time. So that was not,
No.
Was there 55 minutes somewhere in the rules to file late? No. It was arbitrary. They decided they would give you that much time, but not the extra 27 minutes.
Yeah, that's another way of thinking about it. They could have notified me earlier when I might have been in my office and been able to file on time, but they waited 2 hours or 3 hours and 5 minutes. I don't really know if they opened that day at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. before notifying me that I had missed the attachment.
See, I personally am more annoyed at Fred's disqualification than my own. And the reason is that in legal work, and in this case where there is an arbitrary decision to extend the filing time, then to enforce it when you happen to be a little beyond it, it just screams of prejudice and an attitude of unfairness. I mean,
clearly there was an expression of the intent to file because all but the signatures was there on time, right, Fred?
Correct.
Yeah, so clearly it was not, you missed it, but the train left, I know you got a ticket, but the train left. No, there was nothing like that. It sounds to me. And I think any of us who've been involved in group where you have elections understand there's 2 things going on. You need good people, and it's good for the group to have competitive elections, not to engender division and rancor, but to just have the best people come forth and to get new blood. Now, Fred, pardon me for saying this, but you would not have been exactly new blood. Have you served before?
I am a previous director for New England. That's correct.
So clearly, you would have been an excellent candidate to put before the members of your division. They had voted you in before.
That's correct. But this, and my position is that what happened was inconsequential, unintended, inadvertent, and really an excusable mistake. But in certain quarters, I'm not regarded as one of the cool kids, and they did not allow me any slack.
Well, not that any favoritism should have been shown, but when you look at the qualifications for candidates, I'm simply saying all 3 of you were outstanding candidates. And I just speak as a life member. And it's like I say at my church, I'm just a member of the congregation that writes a little check every month. I'm nobody. I'm just somebody out here who would vote for someone. So I just say you're excellent candidates. Now, question for all 3 of you. And Dan, you and I have talked a little bit about this. So you have stated that the rule they claim you violated was sort of obverse in time. It was after the fact. You didn't have it ahead of time. It was sort of, I hate to say made up, but you did, and I'll go with that, made up. Now, has this ever happened before? Now, I want to tell you why. Bylaw 46D says disqualification, blah, 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 is to be applied by the board of directors only in the rarest of circumstances. Now, for my career, I've been a bean counter. I have a PhD in sociology and statistics. So when you see a word like rare, that gets my ears. I get to talking. So in the rarest of circumstances, yet 3 candidates in the very same election cycle got DQ. Strange?
Rare.
Has it ever, how many just your impression, how many times in your last, whatever number of years you care to remember, has a candidate been disqualified?
Somebody pointed out the last time, it's been several years ago, and I can't remember why. Let me be being fair here. When it comes to the E&E board, in the bylaws, you're not, they have the final word. In other words, you're not supposed to argue with them. They're supposed to have the final word. And that was their original complaint about me, that I argued with them, which I don't think I did. I got all the emails. I don't see the argument there, but they do have the final word for that. And that was their original mark they said they disqualified me for. They later changed it via Mintzer. I mean, he himself was one that started, Mintzer was the one that came out in the first meeting he was at and says I was qualified because I argued with the E&E board.
Dan, let me just say this. A judge has the final word. Now, I'm not an attorney. I've stayed in the Holiday Inn Express with a boatload of them, and I've been a consultant to many, and I've hired a couple, okay? So I'm not an attorney. However, a judge has the final word, right? A lawyer's opinion is an opinion. A judge's opinion is called the law, at least for the moment. And so you can argue with the judge within the bounds of the decorum of the court, if it pleased the court, and your case is not prejudiced, right? Attorneys here. So my point is, just because they got the final word does not mean to me that you can't question what they're applying and how they're reasoning.
Exactly. You should be able to, if in this case, Scott, who was flexing some muscle that I think he put onto himself. I don't see where he had that authority, but he claimed, apparently he felt he did. His problem was I wasn't bending to him as individual. And I made it clear that the situation was I needed to hear from Mickey Baker. That's, he's the driver of that boat. And that was my request. And Scott did not like that. He really got upset.
Frank, you've spoken about these 3 disqualifications. You have not spoken to a 4th interesting activity.
Enlighten us.
In the Hudson Division, W2GD was running, and the incumbent issued a letter to the entirety of the membership in the Hudson Division during the campaign period, highlighting his experience and qualifications on the grounds that he was a new director and should have the opportunity to do that. But there is a rule which says you shouldn't be using that equivalent of the franking privilege, the ability to contact every member of the division, if it might have an impact on the outcome of the election. The E&E committee, I was once chairman of the E&E committee, ruled that the letter to every member of the division touting the qualifications and experience of the new director was not intended to affect the outcome of the election. That's not what the rule says, but that's what they ruled. So I guess I would say to you, in 4 of the 5 divisions up for election, there were interesting circumstances.
Well, Fred, did you intend to put your signature on that application?
Well, the signature, my signature was, in fact, on the application. It was the attachment of 10 members of the league petitioning the league to allow me on the ballot. I failed to include
and
that.
you had those signatures, right?
Yes, and I produced them.
And you intended, hear me, you intended to include them, did you not?
Correct.
Oh, well, isn't that equivalent?
And I did, in fact, produce them by 27 minutes after noon.
Well, you say, but this is my little humorous twist here. It was intentions to justify one decision. It was irrelevant in your case. And I apologize to our listeners for not I guess it got by me that there was a 4. Thank you for bringing that up clearly. And gosh, the coalescence of rarity in these circumstances seems to be amazing, but wow, it's really in favor of incumbents is what I'm hearing.
Fred, maybe you can refresh my memory, but it wasn't just that. The W2GD complained officially at least twice about that. And what was the reaction to the E&E committee? Do you remember?
The E&E committee ruled that the incumbent director's letter to the members during the campaign period, which I view as free advertising, was not, in their words, intended to affect the outcome of the election. My view is when you get a free mailing to every member, casting things the way you'd like to be known, it impacts the outcome of the election, whether you intend it or not. And the intent issue was no part of the rule.
So it's even more insidious than what you heard a moment ago.
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole lot of freelancing and judgment. And Fred, you've been chair of that. So talk as former chair. What's it like being the chair of that committee, just for a brief time? Because it's often we in the hinterlands, rail against the night of the machine. Well, if you're running that machine, sometimes you look at it a little differently. I've been in some of those kinds of things, like chair of the Starkville, Mississippi Capital Improvements Committee. When the police chief wanted a new police station, he wasn't getting it. So I had black and whites that tailed me home from campus every single night, by the way. So I hear you. But what's it like being chair of the E&E?
Well, first of all, you do get some really spurious complaints. Many of them are in the nature of, I don't like so-and-so. I don't know why you're allowing him on the ballot. And basically, those just get dismissed because they're not citing a reason in the bylaws or the rules and regulations. Then you get some factual disputes and you inquire to see if the facts are as stated in a complaint. During my tour of duty, we never disqualified anybody.
And
nothing rose to a violation of the bylaws, the so-called procedural and those types of things.
At that time, that's correct.
And I'd like to bring up one point here, since you brought up the Hudson Division. I think that and I've written about this, I think that almost the bigger ethical problem here is that our bylaws allow current division directors to resign in favor of their vice directors within such a short time before an election. Wilson would not have been the incumbent if there had been a rule saying, hey, a division director cannot resign 6 months or a year before an election is to take place. And if that was an isolated incident, I wouldn't be so incensed about it, but it happens over and over and over.
It really does. It's a widely known inside the room way of getting your favored son, usually your vice director, elevated in time to take all the possible advantage of incumbency. And furthermore, you will see when we get to talk about the brand new bylaw 18, how much more protective the league is today on incumbents than it was even a couple of years ago.
That is something we want to transition to. Let me ask you, are you familiar with Bylaw 35?
Not at this moment. If you'll remind me,
I'll be happy to. In fact, I wrote a column on it. It says, basically, if you're the CEO, you can't have another job. And the current CEO is listed with Berkshire Hathaway as an agent for that company. And so here's my question about this, and I don't take this comment wrong, but it's like all this almost mysticism about ethics of elections and those two bylaws, and yet you're blatantly ignoring another one. So I'm just saying that in passing. I'm not saying that the election issues aren't real and that you weren't treated unfairly. I believe you were, from what I know. I'm just raising, does a board pick and choose the bylaws it wants to enforce? And I want to just raise that because when you start asking for tax exemption from the IRS, you promise to behave in certain ways. And I think I think the other attorney there, Mr. Roderick, keeps talking about fiduciary responsibility. We'll move on to Bylaw 18. I want to raise that because it seems like all of the smoke is around the elections. It should be. But there are some other bylaws that are blatantly being ignored and looked at in the other way. And it feeds into what we heard from Jim and Dan, and perhaps you too, Fred. You look the other way when the emperor has no clothes on, right?
I might add something to what you're saying there. They, in several cases, didn't ignore it. They didn't. The bylaw didn't exist. There was no bylaw that says you couldn't be a part of. You couldn't live in two different places. You couldn't have a vacation home. There was nothing like that. But they utilized that bylaw that didn't exist then. They're trying to make this now.
Well, Dan, I'm just making the point that the CEO has a job. It's public. It's on a website. I don't know if he makes any money. I'm told by a sitting board member that he says, "Oh, I'm just going there to protect my wife when she may be uncomfortable." You don't have to get a real estate license and get hired to do that. You just kind of attend, and that's a real thing, by the way. That is a real security risk. I wanted to just make that point here before we move on. So, Dan, do you want to bring up the proposed bylaw 18 and kind of introduce that so we can get our guests to focus on that?
Well, so as our three guests know, bylaw 18 was there was a proposed bylaw change that was approved at the January board meeting. Fred has done a great job of analyzing that. Maybe we let Fred talk about it.
This bylaw was introduced by K08IZ, a director, and it was seconded by N8SY. And it changes the bylaws of the ARRL to do a bunch of things which I firmly believe should cause it to be called the Incumbent Protection Act of 2025. First of all, under this bylaw, the board no longer wants you to know how an incumbent has voted in the past, nor may a challenger criticize an incumbent directly or indirectly. You can't even say the incumbent voted in a way I would not have voted, and therefore you should vote for me. Also, you heard from others here that in order to run for office these days, some folks think it's advisable to send out a trifold or a postcard or something that costs money. But under the new bylaw 18, you can't do any fundraising outside the division. You can't raise funds by using a service such as GoFundMe, even if you limit the contributions to donors within your own division. The way this is written, you can't use a national service. Doesn't talk about where the money comes from. You can't solicit advice, even from your brother who might live in another division, for financial help in running for director. To enhance the power of incumbency, no board member may become involved in an election that is outside of their own division. This includes providing financial support, providing testimonials, campaigning, actively engaging and supporting potential candidates. So let us assume for a moment that I am the current, for the purposes of what we're discussing, New England director. I cannot call N3JT on the phone and offer him some thoughts on how he might improve his chances of winning in another division. I can't appear anywhere. I can't create a testimonial. I can't send him $5. My thought is that if you want thoughts on how a candidate might vote, who knows better about the performance of an incumbent than another board member who was in the room? To enhance the power of incumbency, no board member can provide information to a challenger unless the information is shared with the entire board and vetted, I have no idea what that means, in advance by E&E. So that just gives the opportunity for E&E to delay factual campaigning by a non-incumbent. By the way, another part of bylaw 18 is that no challenger can use Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, My ARRL Voice, the CW apps, YCCC, PVRC websites, a traffic handler, VHF satellite AM, repeater website, or reflectors with members outside the division. So, for example, you are a member of the Frankfurt Radio Club. You cannot post anything to the FRC website about your candidacy because they have members in New Jersey. Or in Jim's division, you can't post anything to the PVRC website because they have members who are not in that division. They may be up in Pennsylvania. By the way, this suggests a perfect way to disqualify a future challenger. If the challenger is asking for votes on any particular website, unbeknownst to the challenger, you could just solicit somebody outside the division to join the website or reflector and cause him to be disqualified. So the new bylaw 18 is, in my opinion, the Incumbency Protection Act of 2025.
Thank you for that. Jim, would you quickly respond? Just note any differences you might have for the sake of time.
Where was that new section about residency? Was that in 18 or 46?
I don't remember, but the point you're making is that this most recent, I think it's in 18, this most recent board meeting now requires a candidate to be a permanent resident
voting
of the division. Now, if permanent means permanent, that means you really can't have a lake house in another division. It probably means you can't go to a hospital in another division for medical treatment for a few days or more, because that would take away the permanence of your residency. It's a fascinating bylaw designed to keep incumbents
who
never leave their homes protected.
That last part is the N3JT revision.
Yes. I think that you are a guy who's been privileged to have his very own bylaw.
Yeah, thank you.
Plus the GoFundMe clause.
Dan in Idaho, quick thoughts.
The thing that goes through my mind is, what's the bottom line objective here? What, by this bylaw 18, what did they achieve? And maybe since Fred does a study on it, he can allude what he sees they're trying to do or have done with that.
This is the kind of the pregnant question, if you will. Let's back off a couple of miles up. Why is all this going on? What's the virtue of maintaining permanent incumbents on the board?
It's to protect the good old boy.
And not only them, but Minster in particular. Don't kid yourself about that.
I call that, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is something that in people I've talked with, the orchestration. So to quote him, if it's wrong, but it's from a valid source so he can get the board he wants.
On this particular topic, I just need to point out that under the new bylaw 18, all campaign literature must be submitted to NA2AA in advance, or at least simultaneously, to be vetted.
This kind of puts the question of who reports to whom. And I kind of put an article out there on my blog that one of the things I've done is study volunteer organizations and understand problems. And sometimes they go, oh, we got bad people. And you look at the organization and you realize you can't get there from here regardless of the people involved. And I believe that's the case with ARRL. But anyway, that's at K4FMH.com. Dan Romanchik, what's your follow-up to why is this going on?
Well, who knows? I mean, we could sit here all day and debate that. From my point of view, what I always ask myself when things like this come up, is this good for the ARRL? And is this good for amateur radio? I can't say that it is. And that's my criterion when something like this comes up.
I think there are a couple of reasons. I think Minster, who's making nominally $350,000 a year, wants to continue that income. And I think I've heard rumors, more than rumors, that he wants directors to be appointed, named by donors. That is to say, donor-supported direct. It'll be a tightly controlled organization by Minster himself at the top until he decides to leave. And I think that's what underlies all this. I don't think he's interested in the betterment of amateur radio, or he would do something more creative or involve a more participative approach to the continuing decline of membership.
Jim, I've had sources on the board basically tell me what you're saying. They may parse it slightly different, but the main picture is that. Dan, Marla, were you going to make a comment?
Well, they said they've also suggested that they might try to do the same thing with the section managers. They'd be appointed, not voted in. The section managers is the voice for the sections. I represent Idaho, my section. I listen to them. I relay information. I get information for them. Now, then, what they want is somebody that they can, anybody is appointed can be let go at will. In other words, right now they have to go jump through the loops to get rid of me. If I was appointed, that would not be the case. If I wasn't doing exactly as they wanted me to do, when they wanted me to do it, out the door I would go, they replace me with somebody they think would.
And as the organizational chart reads now, basically a section manager is reported to get his or her marching orders from the director of field operations. So while you're elected, you have no authority to make things happen. Am I wrong?
You're right. I can appoint people. I put people.
Well, I mean, as far as HQ is concerned, you have no. I mean, you're reporting to a director. Yeah, and this is my point. And so many hams don't understand that.
We don't. They try to do that, but we do not report to the director. There was a move to have the directors, us reporting to the directors. The problem that I have from Idaho is my director knows nothing about Idaho and doesn't know nothing about, how can he make decisions for the people within?
Right. Well, Dan, what I'm talking about is the director of field services. I mean, the guy in HQ.
Yep.
As opposed to your division director. And that's part of the organizational problem. Listen, we've probably run our length for this narrow folk. I want to just say thank you for your willingness to put yourself forward as a candidate.
Frank, on that particular topic, I'd just like to insert, we need people to put themselves forward as candidates in the next election cycle because, as is probably plain, I think bylaw 18 was a terrible idea. It's an abomination of a bylaw. And the 4 candidates in the next election cycle voted for it. Great Lakes, Scott Yonley, N8SY, Dakota, Bill Lippert, AC0W, Delta, David Norris, K5UZ, and Midwest, Art Ziegelbaum, K0AIZ. If you think that they did the right thing in voting for bylaw 18 with all of its inherent problems, then you should vote for them. And if you think they did not do the right thing and that bylaw 18 is an abomination, as I believe, then you should help us to find candidates to run against those directors.
Fred, well said, Fred. Well said.
Frank, just as a final note, you did see the April QST statement by Minster about opposition to him or to the E&E, correct? In how ARRL functions, in the opinion by Minster in April 2025 QST, he says the E&E committee routinely comes under scrutiny because it must interpret behaviors or actions that apply ARRL standards as defined in myriad government or governing documents. It is a thankless job, and absurd posts you read online are rarely, if ever, based on the fact, just a desire by some for there to be no rules.
Jim, I had an article on my blog about the so-called shadow board, and my humor was only the shadow knows, if you're old enough to remember that program.
I do.
So I put a postscript in because as I was about to publish that, I got my QST online. And he talked about all these baseless conspiracy theories. And I guess my comment is I put in writing, what's more conspiratorial than an intentional shadow board that systematically excludes between 21 and 46% of the members of the ARRL. So when the CEO gaslights, as my friend Dan Romanchik said to me privately on that, there are those who will believe it. But those who are watching, I hope, will see through it and will follow Fred's advice. It's difficult to get people to run. Not every ham wants to commit to traveling around the division, particularly those that have a couple of years on them, like I do, for example. So, Fred, I'm not speaking against what you're saying. You're desperately correct that we do need people to sort of take back the lead, because the other option, as Dan and I each have written in our blog, they're leaving the ship at 1,000 to 2,000 members a month, I'm told. They won't publish that. They want to keep it secret, even from members of the board. Fortunately, there are people in the building in Newington that just don't like what he's doing, and they're willing to talk to me, and I appreciate that. So, Dan Romanchik, any final thoughts?
Well, I've said all along that we have to think about how to get organized. Just like Fred says, we got to find people to run, and all these changes to 18 certainly are going to make it that much harder. I almost don't see any other way to do it.
Well, Frank, let me offer you a hopeful thought.
Yes.
With a 15-member board, the magic number is 8 for a majority. There were 5 votes against bylaw 18. There are 4 slots, directorships, up for election in the 2026 election cycle. Great Lakes, Dakota, Delta, and Midwest. If all 4 of those individuals who voted for bylaw 18 were defeated, there would be 9 votes that would be for more transparency. And if you only win 3 of the 4, there'd be 8, which is the magic number. So I think that within the calendar year 2026, it is not impossible to understand there's a chance for change here. By the way, in the 2025 election cycle, the Southeast and Rocky Mountain are up for election. Rocky Mountain, the director is Jeff Ryan, K0RM, of long-standing and heavy-duty service on the budget part of the operation, are up for election. K0RM voted for Bylaw 18 with a passionate speech urging people to join him. So I think it is possible within a matter of months to change the complexion of the board, but we need candidates, and I would like to see vigorous democracy in action.
Brad, I'm going to close it out using some historic language from your neck of the woods. Hear, hear. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Dan and I would love to have you back on another occasion. There are many other things that we need to discuss, and people like you who are knowledgeable, you are insightful, and you have the direct experience that the most rank and file members and ex-members just don't have. So thank you very much for joining us here on the ICQ podcast. This is Frank, K4FMH, and Dan, I'll let you sign off.
73.
73.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our feature this episode. And as always, we'd really appreciate any comments you have to us by visiting our webpage, ICQPodcast.com, and clicking on the Contact Us button there, and you can drop us your mail and let us know what you thought. Talking about things letting people thought, previous member of the team, Matt Nesu, friend of the show, and always I know when his world might calm down, he'll come back to us. Matt and November Mike 0 November Juliet X-Ray drops us mail. So regarding the news that Dodge Savings Drive with a healthy splash of political axe grind seems poised to cull Voice of America. As a keen shortwave listener as a teenager, Voice of America to me a reference of objective journalism that was a counterpoint to other national stations that seemed to paint a rosy picture in controlled economies. That was in the 80s and the 90s, and times have changed and fake news seems more universal. But taking down the Voice of America from 400 million listeners, despite short-term perceived political bias, has a greater detrimental impact on its fortunate citizens than the US or Western listeners, for what it's worth. So Matt, thank you very much there for sending on that information, your thoughts there, and interested to know what other listeners may think as well. Well, I say we'd like to thank again our monthly and subscription donors who have kindly supported us this episode, and we'd ask you to consider us by visiting ICQPodcast.com/donate, where anything you send our way is greatly appreciated and shows your value in the show. So please do consider us, if you found value from today's show. We'd also like to thank Frank, K4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Dan, KB6 November Uniform, for taking part there in our features episode in relation to the ARRL's Election Committee Adventures. And of course, Dan, along with Caryn, KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa. Thank you for sharing your views upon this episode's news. Well, as always, we'd like to bid you 73s continue to enjoy the hobby, have great fun in everything you do, and as I say, as always, we'll be back in a fortnight's time with our next episode of the ICQ podcast. Please do consider us at ICQPodcast.com/donate, and we'll catch you again in a fortnight's time. 73s all.